from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, February 8th, 2019. And I tell you, down here in New Orleans, it's a mess around Mardi Gras. We usually tape on Tuesdays to have our program ready, but tomorrow we're having to tape on Monday because tomorrow is Mardi Gras. Well, we have a serious program today, and we have a lot to talk about. So let's begin with talking about the turning the cities of Israel into hell. And that was the headline, how the Palestinians want to torch Israel and destroy anyone who's talking about the peace talks to give the two nations the opportunity to exist side by side. Now let's talk about the Keeping the Babies Alive bill that failed in the U.S. This is a pretty painful story that we're going to talk about this morning. And then we're going to continue with our Deception and Lying Wonders series, Looking to the Heavens. We'll be talking about that as we wrap up our program today. But let's begin with statue vandalism. And this has got to be one of the stupidity crimes in the nation. Talking about destroying another statue. But wait till you hear this one. This is a story out of North Carolina. Jerk punk sets fire to General Lee's statue, but not the Confederate one. You can't make this up. This is reported by WHSV3 TV out of North Carolina. They got the wrong statue, trying to get rid of racism in America. Vandals have set fire to a statue of a World War II veteran they mistook for Confederate Army Robert E. Lee. This is true. They tried to burn it, but how do you torch concrete to begin with? But they vandalized it, but they got the wrong guy, all right? On Friday morning, museum workers were stunned to find a marble statue dedicated to U.S. Army Airborne founder Major General William C. Lee, singed black and badly burned, or singed black and badly burned after the vandals had set it alight on Thursday, February the 14th. This man was a hero, all right? The statue was erected in front of the William C. Lee Airborne Museum in Dunn, North Carolina. So I just wanted to bring that out to you because the removing of all the statues even still continues. If they can't find something, they'll just make something up and try to burn it down and get rid of it also. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because you see these stories and I know they go by and you don't think much about them, but that just shows you the absolute utter stupidity of people of trying to burn down a statue. And he was one of the founders of I believe it was the 101st Airborne, which they don't have written here in this part of the story. And there's a museum that's kind of built around him in that city. All right, now let's go on. The border problem will not go away. Now, the short story, I just want to follow through with this. This is incredible because this was reported on February 18th. This is coming out. You ready for this? 5 million strong wave of illegals plan to storm the border this year. 5 million people are planning to storm the border. And this is out of U.S. Politics and News. The CEO of Gallup has issued an ambitious poll of 450 million Latin Americans in 33 countries, and the results could be a staggering wake-up call to the American people. Now, this is something we've been talking about now in News Nuggets and Insights now for about 2 years, is the end result is if you don't fix the problem, and the problem in South America and Central America, it will escalate. We're seeing that in Venezuela right now. They're talking about as many as 8 million people fleeing Venezuela if they don't get something done soon with the fighting, the violence, and people starving. They have no way to buy food because prices of food have quadrupled just about every day is what they're talking about down there. So the people have to flee to just exist. Now, imagine when we say this, because see, this is going to become global before Jesus Christ returns, is that the whole world is going to be caught in a mess. And that's why they're going to be looking for some charismatic person to help this world get them out of this mess. All of what we're looking at today, these are the foundations. These are the roots. If you're looking for the feeder bands that create the problem, they're right here, right in front of our very eyes. And they're based upon the issues that we're dealing with today for the borders. 5 million people potentially coming to America or trying to break into America. The most shocking finding of all of this was the 5 million Latin Americans that plan to head into the United States as illegal aliens within the next 12 months. If that is not a crisis, according to the mainstream media, it is not, then what would be a real crisis? In other words, what would a real crisis look like if this is not a crisis? 5 million people, just imagine, they start lining up on the borders of Mexico. Mexico can't handle that either. You're going to see just a tremendous amount of resurgence in the governmental problem, and the military problem. People are going to wind up getting killed through all of this if this actually takes place through the course of 5 million people in just 1 week. So now, I just wanted to bring that little story out. We'll follow more of that as we're going through that. But these little stories, they hit the news and they disappear. You know, it's like, I believe Rush calls them the drive-by media. Anything to catch a headline. Well, those headlines sometimes don't go away. They just quit talking about them. And that headline is not going to go away. All right, turning cities into Israel into hell. The new missile threat in Gaza, February 26, 2019. Now, I don't have in the program here today, but I want you to keep this in mind as I go through this. Benjamin Netanyahu has been the valiant warrior in the forefront to try to maintain peace and try to protecting his nation. But ever since Donald Trump got into office, there's been about a 2.5 years of an attack on Benjamin Netanyahu to try to get him out of office. They believe they have reached the point that they can now charge him with criminal activity. And what was interesting was these charges have come out just 40 days before the election over there. So my concern is this: when you see what's going on, if they can neutralize the strong man, who comes in next to protect Israel? Will they negotiate peace and give away land like they did in the past to allow, like the Palestinians and others, to encroach even closer upon Jerusalem, creating the problem? All right, that's the background. That's not part of the story, but that's behind the scenes what's going on. Now, the story picks up from where I just left off here. This is the story in the warning that's coming out now. Right, this is talking about burning the cities of Israel into hell. Okay, the Bible tells us we're supposed to watch. So what we're looking at now as we move forward with everything that I've been talking about, looking for prophetic biblical fulfillment. So quite often what God does for us is he shows us fulfillments in the past to help us understand what he's going to be doing in the future as we move forward. All right, these are for future fulfillments. Now this is talking about Luke 21:20. As you see armies surrounding Jerusalem, God talks about. We see this picture. We all understand that that is the fall of the temple in Jerusalem in the past. Actually, it's happened twice. Babylon and Rome has basically taken over Jerusalem. And God says, Luke 21:20, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. So what we're looking at now as we go through this in the articles and things we've been talking about, obviously, what we're looking for is the visible signs that's beginning to shape up that moves us closer and closer to the Luke 21:20 scenario of the army surrounding Jerusalem. Again, this is one of those articles. This was the headline: no place for Zionist entity in Palestine. This is talking about the new missiles that they're building. The new missile threat goes on. It says this: the Islamic Jihad needs to be taken seriously by those who are working on the upcoming U.S. peace plan. And any land that is given to Abbas and his Palestinian Authority on the West Bank will be used by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad as a base for launching rockets and missiles at Israeli cities. So what are they saying here? They said that everybody now who's working on this peace plan, right, that we're talking about, and of course Donald Trump's administration now is talking about the peace plan and trying to get this to two states to be able to finally come into pass what's taking place. They want everybody to understand that if you do that, if you give away land, they're going to move everything closer, and they're going to be sitting ducks, so to speak, for the new missiles and all the rockets that they have over there. Going on with the article. Then it says the terror groups will not need accurate, long-range rockets to achieve their plan to destroy Israel's population centers. They will be sitting across the street from them. That is the concern that everyone is taking. That is the concern that Benjamin Netanyahu says they will not negotiate giving away more land. Like he says, there would be too close and there'll be no protection for Israel. With all of that, if he is the problem to get all this taken care of, well, then what happens now? Well, you move him out. And so you see the 2 years of the assault on Benjamin Netanyahu, where they eventually can try to bring in someone else who may have a softer tone. So you have a lot at risk over in Israel with what's going on. So we want to bring that out today. Going on now, Israel responds. All right, so in addition to all that, the stories we brought out over a year ago now is talking about the Palestinians who are on their borders every single Friday, all right, every single Friday. Israel unleashes a blistering response to the relentless incendiary balloons that attacks on the Gaza Strip Saturday night, wounding 5 people. Eventually, I think it killed some people and wounded a lot more than this after this actual headline came out. Well, these balloons, they light them, they fill them up with helium, they light up with the incendiary material on it, and they just float them into Israel. And then the balloons pop, and they've actually destroyed over 10,000 acres of farmland, in addition to certain buildings in Israel. So Israel said, we've had enough. So they retaliated. The Palestinians and the Hamas-run coastal enclave have been launching explosive balloons and other explosive aerial devices as part of the Great Return March, which we began talking about over a year ago, told you it was coming. Protest that began on March 30th and has continued for nearly a year. This is another drive-by. The news brings it out, it's news headlines, people get tired of it, it goes away. What hasn't gone away, just like the refugees south of us and the people who are coming into America and illegally, this is continuing at Israel's doorstep and on their border. Kind of interesting when you think about what God says, that he would take down a hedge of protection, huh? Well, that hedge of protection is coming down around the world right now. It says leading to 2,000 separate fires resulting in over 35,000 dunams and approximately 8,500 acres being burnt. It's actually closer to 10,000 acres now. So anyway, this is a story that just came out about that. So now, one more step in through all of this. Palestinians say no peace or reconciliation with the infidels. So all the work Abbas or whoever's been trying to put together, President Trump, is that now there's a new insurgence of an increased effort to block the peace talks, saying that normalization is a crime. What they mean by this is that the efforts to bring about peace was we need to normalize our lives with our neighbors. That's what the peace talk was trying to build. So now it's saying, and they've got posters all over, normalization is a crime. In fact, if you push normalization now, they're telling you are a traitor, and you will be arrested and probably executed. Palestinians, no deal of the century. As Donald Trump was saying that we want the deal of the century. The ruling by the Palestinian scholars, the association is aimed at sending a message to the U.S. administration that the Palestinians and the Muslims will have nothing to do with the deal of the century. Moreover, it serves as a reminder that even if some Arabs do sign peace treaties with Israel, there will always be those Muslims who will denounce them as traitors and accuse them of acting as the Quran and the rulers of Islam. And as you see this posted, this is just one, no deal of the century, as they set it on fire with Donald Trump. There will be no peace in the Middle East. Now, you could try to sign as many peace accords as you want, and it won't be until Jesus Christ returns that he takes over Jerusalem as his headquarters on this earth to rule and reign for 1,000 years that you will ever find peace on this planet in Jerusalem. The Palestinians going on. Mahmoud Abbas, meanwhile, was acutely aware that the Muslims will condemn him and perhaps issue a fatwa calling for his death if he ever dares to make peace with the Jews. That suspicion might explain his recent comments during a visit in Egypt, where he was reported to have said that he does not intend to end his life as a traitor by making concessions to Israel. In other words, it could be now of the rebellion that now he also is afraid to continue in the peace accord. And we have seen anyone who's tried to do that in the past was removed or assassinated. So you're beginning to see that again right now. Now, let's bring this up. Now, I want to tell you in advance, this is a painful story, and I'm sure everyone here has heard a little bit about it, but we want to bring you our Nuggets portion of it too. Senate fails to pass a Born Alive bill. You know, the first time I heard this about a little over a week ago, I actually couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I actually had to stop and I was just shaking my head in prayer. And I said, man, what a sad day for America. So this is just another sad day for America when it boils down to it. What we're going through is actually unbelievably painful, that the Senate couldn't get 60 votes to pass a bill, a Born Alive bill. This was on February 25th. By a vote of 53 to 44, the Senate has failed to pass the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which would have required doctors to provide medical care to infants born alive after an attempted abortion procedure. Now, you know, you got to stop here. It's like, why would you have to have a bill to say that if a baby's born, it's alive, that you got to have a bill to pass a law to protect the baby? But you do. It's a shame that the left, the ungodly in this nation, will have all kind of anger that if an illegal alien dies in custody of a child and bring up all this incredible abuse, but they won't pass a bill to save a baby that's been born in this nation after a botched attempt to try to destroy it and kill it. The bill, sponsored by Senator Ben Sasse, composed by 49 of his fellow Republican senators, needed 60 votes to overcome the legislative filibuster. Well, they couldn't get them. They just couldn't get them. It's let the baby die on the table is what I call it, because that's what it is. When that baby comes out alive, it has to die on the table now. All except 3 Democrats in the Senate just voted in favor of allowing infanticide to go unpunished. They're saying that the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act was a far-right attempt to limit a woman's access to abortion. It had nothing to do with abortion. It had everything to do with the failing of the success of the abortion, the baby being born alive. On Tuesday, the White House host, John Miller, called out the monsters who propagate that lie that killing an infant after birth is a woman's right, because that's what it is, killing the baby after it was born. He says, we're not talking about, he said, unborn children anymore. He says, we're talking about life outside the womb. That's what this dealt with. So we just had 5 Democrats who are running for president of the United States, who are running for the highest office of the land, vote to kill the newborn infants who survive abortion. So actually it's above 5 now. And what we've got here is I've got their names. I'm going to show you in just a second. All 6 here, this is another headline, all 6 of the Democratic senators running for the 2020 presidential nomination voted against the bill. And I'm going to go through this one by one. Cory Booker, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, Kamala Harris of California. By the way, Kamala Harris actually has a bill that's still in place in California who is prosecuting a clinic who taped people who were selling baby body parts to try to put them in jail for illegally taping the conversation. Same person. Pretty much all other bills have been put aside or been withdrawn except her bill. Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, and Bernie Sanders, an independent, of Vermont. Unbelievable what you're seeing. And I wanted to put that out there. These people are running for president. These are the people that we run in this country, and you know their mindset before you put them in. When people go to the polls, we're not a political, but I want to tell you this much. For those who go to the poll, who can vote for something like this, you need to remember one thing. You stand before the throne of God one day, and you have to make a decision where you stand and who you vote for. And you will have to count to God when he says, why did you put someone in office who voted to kill babies? That's what you're going to have to deal with. I want to put that out there, and I want all of God's people to think about that. And when you think about who you support and what you want to do, God's people are to think godly, to do what God says first, not to do anything else. Now, one of these, I was about to say, was it Elizabeth Warren that we saw? We saw it this morning. Elizabeth Warren, she was given a talk at one, and she was asked a question somewhere, do you support infanticide? And she boldly says, infanticide is illegal everywhere in America. And he asked again. She said the exact same thing. Well, I want you to understand, the bill that lets that baby die on the table who has no way to protect itself is infanticide. Now, they can deny infanticide, but the bottom line is there's no way that baby can get up from that table and take care of itself. That means whoever is in that room has to let that baby die. That's infanticide. And I'm going to ask this. I'm going to ask that everybody in this country should be able to go to their Congress people, and they should have somebody in these rooms that if that baby's alive and those doctors or nurses, whoever's there, lets them die with the failure of this bill, because it is illegal for infanticide, to have those people put in jail. That's what should go on right now. If they let the people die, according to Elizabeth Warren, there's no infanticide, that's against the law, then put them in jail. Every baby they let die on that table. That needs to be done across this nation. I'm going to go on now. Harvesting children. HHS extends the contract, I don't know if you heard this or not, to make humanized mice with aborted baby parts for another 90 days. Unbelievable. They're spending more money. The Department of Health and Human Services said it has granted a second 90-day extension to a contract it has with the University of California at San Francisco that requires the UCSF to make humanized mice. Humanized, it's a bad title. What they're doing is they're putting human tissue inside these mice and trying to use them for studies. These creatures are made with implanting mice with human tissues taken from late-term aborted babies. Late term. They have to go to these clinics that are performing late-term abortion, and they're buying these pieces. And the government's funding it for research, supposed for research. According to an estimate as published on this website, the National Institute of Health, which is a division of HHS, will spend, listen to this, $95 million this fiscal year alone on research like the UCSF's humanized mouse contract uses the fetal tissue. Now, not all that $95 million goes for this one, but they're spending $95 this year alone for all its research in these areas, like the one with the mice. I don't know, man. The more you research this stuff, you got to wonder when God says, if people are not crying and sighing for the abominations of this nation, you have to wonder what in the world people are thinking and continuing to do in this nation. All right, this is for the Center for Medical Progress facing charges. This is what I mentioned earlier. The Center for Medical Progress leaders face 15 felony charges for their undercover investigation exposed in Planned Parenthood's baby body parts trade. So the people who do it are scot-free. They're no problem. The people who reported it are finding themselves going to jail if this thing doesn't work out right for them. The judge denies the request to block the Planned Parenthood's videos exposing the sales of the aborted babies. Merit and Center for the Medical Progress founder David Daleiden are on trial in California for recently recording the Planned Parenthood and other abortion activists as part of their undercover investigation. The lawyers for the team believe that there's a political vendetta behind the prosecution, which I believe also. Daleiden and Merritt have been defending themselves in court for years after they exposed the gruesome baby body parts harvesting practices planned in Planned Parenthood. Many of the charges against them have been dropped, but the California case continues. That was the case that was originally started by pro-abortion presidential candidate Kamala Harris. So not only do they want to let the babies die on the table, approve the death of the babies to the moment that they're born, if anybody reports that they're doing something wrong, they're going to go after those people. And that's what we're seeing right now. I don't know, man. sometimes, like on this story, I mean, I know I'm supposed to be reporting on some of these things, but I don't know, this kind of stuff just leaves you speechless, that anybody in their right minds could allow this stuff to take place in America, of all places. Unbelievable. I told you this wasn't a happy session, but we had to bring it out. You have to report. God says you cry and sigh for the abominations that you see. Well, this is there. I mean, it can't get much more gruesome than this. All right, our nugget on this vote, the one of letting the babies die on the table, is like ancient Israel. As the king went, so went the nation. That's why I brought out these presidential candidates who voted for this bill. As the king went, so went the nation. If the king was good, the nation was blessed. If the king was evil, the nation was cursed. There is no way that God will step in and save a nation from itself when it continues to kill and murder its own babies, and will vote in those who continue to promote those evils. One of the 7 things God says he hates: hands that shed innocent blood. All right, let's take a break. Let's go to our little video session here before we get into deception and lying wonders. This is one called Repaid, Restored. And I'll be right back for maybe a happier session. Well, welcome back. Well, you know, on the positive side, Jesus Christ is coming back. He's going to set things straight. And not is he going to restore things for you and I, but he's going to restore this nation to the godly nation that he intended to be from the beginning. And not just this nation, the entire world will be set back in place. All right, so now let's go look at this now. Deception and lying wonders. This is actually part 5. So it's pretty in-depth in its program, so you can only cover so much each week. So we're going to focus now on something we talked about a little bit in the last sermon that I did. We're going to follow through in a piece of that right here. This is the misconception of the elect. This was something in my whole life in the church that I was taught that you just don't look at the stars, it's all pagan. So it says, it is evil to look at the stars to get any biblical insight. This is what I was always taught. For as long as I was in the church, it was my understanding that we don't look at the stars for biblical insight. It's considered to be pagan and evil to its core. The church would then go on and talk about sorcerers and palm readers and horoscopes and etc. And, you know, for all my life in the church, I pretty well much thought that way. However, we didn't consider all these scriptures. The scriptures where God talks about looking to the stars is for insight, to glorify him, for the wonders that are supposed to be coming. So look what God says. Most of God's churches today still teach those same things, and they mock those who look at the events of heaven. And I know over the last few years, as we recorded some of these things, many people in God's church they just laughed at it and thought it was just nonsense. And I understand that. But look what God says in the Bible. He warns us. What's the difference between astronomy and astrology? The astronomy is the science of studies that everything outside the Earth's atmosphere, such as planets, stars, asteroids, galaxies, and properties, the relationship to those celestial bodies, and astronomers base their studies on the research and observation. Astrology, on the other hand, is the belief that the positioning of stars and planets affect the way and the events on the Earth. Now, I covered some of this last week. If you got the last news and nuggets, I want to bring this back in because if people didn't see the program, they won't know where we're coming from. Why are you covering the stars? Because there's a big difference. People have used the celestial bodies and their orbits and rotations to make a religion or predict the future that individual events. Now, this is where the evil comes in, is where people can predict from the stars that they can tell the future. Well, actually, you can't. Only God can do that. However, even in the explanation, as I brought out on the astrology, is that talking about the stars, the planets, how they affect the way events occur on the Earth. Well, that itself is a misrepresentation because look at this. Deception, even in distinguishing the separation, here's what God says. Let there be lights in the firmament, this is in Genesis, let there be lights in the firmament and heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. So even though they can't predict the future, God's saying that they're there for signs. The difference is you have to look at the signs of what God's doing, not what you're doing. You can't predict the difference. That's the big difference of the whole thing. See, I don't know if I had James here or not. Okay, I didn't have James in here. But if you go back to the book of James, James warns us how evil it is to say, well, we're going to go do this. And God says, if God wills, you're going to go do that. In other words, you can't predict that you're going to be alive tomorrow. You can't predict that you're not going to walk out of your building, get hit by a car, and die today. So you just don't know. So you have to trust God. So now, we interviewed Mark Biltz in some of these things way back 4 years ago, and we're going to be playing the video. I got 2 videos I want to play today. And the first one's a little long. It's about 10 minutes long, but it's really good for you to see this and how we got into understanding some of these from the interview with Mark, talking about the sun, the stars, signs and seasons, God's feast days, and his appointed times. He also talks about astronomy versus astrology. So let's take a break and take a look at that video, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. The information you have is increased knowledge that we didn't have before 2008.
Right, exactly.
We did not have that before 2008. So if you would, as we go through this, bring us back to how you came across all this wonderful information.
Well, sure, Tom. Thank you so much for allowing me to be with you today. And it all started back in 2008. And I was looking on the internet, and I saw this total lunar eclipse over the Temple Mount, and it was on Purim. And I mean, it was so beautiful seeing this bright blood red moon over the Temple Mount in Israel. And as I was looking at it, of course, it makes you think about the scripture verses where it talks about the sun turning to sackcloth and the moon to blood. And the plain meaning of that is a total lunar eclipse or a total solar eclipse. And so I thought, well, let's go see, because I remembered in Isaiah, in Joel, in the Gospels, in Acts, in Revelation, it talks about the sun turning to sackcloth and the moon to blood. So I knew that God created everything scientifically. It's all math, it's all science. And I knew that NASA had recorded 5,000 years of eclipses. And so I went back to NASA's website and I started, going through it. And I noticed, the next 10 years is what I wanted to look at. And I noticed in 2014, in 2015, there were 4 blood moons or total lunar eclipses in a row without having a partial or a penumbral eclipse in between them. And I thought, well, what are the odds of having 4 total lunar eclipses in a row? And as I was doing my research, You know, Tom, according to NASA, over 5,000 years, okay, there's only been a little less than 4,000 total lunar eclipses, which means you only have one total lunar eclipse on average every year and a half. And here we had 4 in a year and a half. So that just makes the odds skyrocket, and then they even go higher. As I was looking at it, I was noticing the dates in March, September, April, September. I think it was March and October, and then April and September. And I got to thinking, wow, how often does this happen? Especially to have 4 in a row. As I was researching this, and I noticed that to have 4 blood moons in a row without any other eclipses, in between, and then finding them falling on the biblical holidays, that was the big key, Tom. When I was in my prayer closet and I was praying, and all of a sudden it's like God said, Mark, you need to put these on the right calendar. You need to put these on the biblical calendar. So I did. And when I saw they fell on Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles, all within a year and a half, both times, I thought, oh my goodness, how often does that happen? Not only how often do you have 4 total lunar eclipses in a row, how often do you have them in a row falling on the feast days? And it's only happened 8 times.
All right, let's stop for a second and explain what you just said.
Sure.
To an audience who understands Hebrew and Hebrew roots in the background, is that what you just told him is foreign. All right, so let's
Sure.
back up for just a second for this audience who may not be familiar with that. What are the Hebrew holy days that these are falling on, and why have we missed that for the last 2,000 years?
Oh, that's great. A great question. I like to start in the beginning. And as you know, Genesis means in the beginning. The word Breshit, which is the first word of the Bible, we translate as in the beginning. And in Genesis 1:14, God said He created the sun and the moon for signs. We think light and heat, but He said He created them for signs or signals. And then He says He also created them for seasons. Well, you know what? When I hear the word season, I think of fall or winter or summer, but that's the wrong translation. You know, the same word, the same Hebrew word they translate as seasons, in Leviticus 23, they translate that word as feasts, as in the feasts of the Lord. Well, I don't know about you, but when I think of feast, I think of food. I think of a big old Thanksgiving turkey dinner. And so does that Hebrew word mean fall or food? They're both wrong. Where in Genesis, the Hebrew word moed means a divine appointment, appointed times when God is going to intersect human history. And so here, when He's talking about He created them for seasons, days, and years, He's not talking about our pagan solar calendar, which is a great calendar. The Muslims use only the moon for their calendar, great scientific calendar. The world uses a total solar calendar. Everything's based on the sun, which is a great calendar. Julius Caesar came up with it, and then it went to the Gregorian calendar as he tweaked it. But God said, let them be used for seasons, days, and years. That means for the Jewish calendar or the biblical calendar that determines when Passover is, when the Feast of Trumpets is, Rosh Hashanah. And so that's when God created them for. And so a total lunar eclipse is when the earth is between the sun and the moon and totally blocks it, which is why it turns blood red. A definition of term, a tetrad, basically means 4 total lunar eclipses in a row. And so the calendar I'm talking about is the biblical calendar.
Since this calendar was set in place, here's the amazing thing, and why we have missed all this, is because we have been following a calendar set by man.
Right.
We have lost track of God's plan, His calendar, and His time frame. Is that correct?
Totally correct. It's like God has a day timer, okay? And He says, here's when I want to meet with you. Now, if I know everyone's watching, more than likely has a job, and if their boss says, hey, I want to meet you at 5 o'clock on Friday, if you tell them, nope, sorry, that ain't going to work in my schedule, let's make it 2 on Tuesday, you're not going to have a job very long. Well, right. I think everyone believes in divine appointments or would love to have a divine appointment with God. Little do they know, they're scheduled. There are literally appointments that God put in His day timer when He said, I want to meet with you. And why would we not want to meet with God?
That's right, absolutely. Now, there's one other misunderstanding. I'll bring in here, is that most people think that these days, because we mention days, they sound Jewish, is that the Bible says in the Old Testament, in Leviticus 23, He says, these are the feasts of the eternal. In other words, these days don't belong to any special set group, but they're God's appointed times. Is that correct?
That's right. The Lord says these are my feasts. It doesn't say the Jewish feasts. It doesn't say Israel's feasts. It says these are the feasts of the Lord. So if you belong to the Lord, these belong to you. And one thing I think that's so important is you don't realize this unless you've lived in a place like this, like I did in Garden City, Kansas, where it's right at the edge of a time zone change from Central Time to Mountain Time. We had to have 2 clocks because you could drive 1 mile and be an hour later.
That's right.
You know, and so it's so important to realize that even when I'm talking to you and I'm in Washington and you're in Louisiana, well, we have to know whose time zone are we going to talk in so that we make sure we meet each other. Well, God has a calendar. We have to have a calendar to operate in this world, but we have to realize God has his own calendar, and if he wants to meet with us, we got to meet according to his calendar.
That's right. Now, let me take a moment into reconfirming what you just read in Genesis and the signs in the heavens.
Sure.
All right, so I've got something actually, I've got this out of your book.
Sure.
Right, and this is coming from a psalm, and you can quote the psalm, but this is on page 39 of your book. By the way, is you want to tell them the name of that book, because we're going to be showing it as we go through the program.
Blood Moons.
Blood Moons, and it's by Mark Biltz. Mark Biltz. I found this very poetic, so I wanted to share this with the audience today. It says this: our Abba Father wants the entire world to know he exists. So he created the world as the nursery, and they are what he painted on the ceiling of our room, so that when we, his children, gaze heavenward, we see his glory. All right, so God put these out there for appointments, for times, and so we can realize that he's the one who's in charge. And it says in Psalm 19:1, it says, the heavens declare his glory, and the firmament shows his handiwork.
That's right. It's an incredible verse. The heavens are literally declaring the glory of God. It goes on to say, and their line has gone out through all the earth. And the Hebrew word for line there implies a chorus line, as if all the heavenly stars are singing God's praises. He created the sun and the moon and the stars. I'd like to throw this in. I'm totally against astrology, which is basically where people like to think, oh, you're into astrology. No, the astrology, they like to make the planets and the stars all about you. Well, that's not the case. We need to realize it's all about God. And so as long as we keep our focus on biblical astronomy and science and realize that they're declaring God's glory, the devil wants to pervert everything. And so what we want to do is get it back in God's hands where it belongs. But I really believe the heavens are declaring the glory of God. In Psalms, God also says the moon is my one faithful witness in heaven.
That's right.
All right, so that's why we've been talking about the stars, and we've been following through for about 4 years off and on as we study the different blood moon tetrads and all the events that's been taking place. Now, this is where I put last week in our sermon, we're talking about the Shemitahs, the blood moons, and the possible connection to the comet Levy. That's so when we ended our sermon last week in part 2 on deception, we're going to go into that next week. You get a head start here. So if you get in this program and you don't get the sermon, I'm going to show you what we interviewed from back 4 years ago that we didn't cover at all about the comet, it's called Shu-Levy 94. I don't have the Shu in here, but take a look at this. It's only 2.5 minutes long, and then I'll be back and we're going to explain what he's talking about and some of the possibility of the events and some of the things that I said in this interview 4 years ago. Let's go ahead and play the second clip now.
Is it possible that we move into the duality of the 7 years of lean now?
Well, I think so. Here's what I think is incredible. In 1994, it was a Shemitah year. Let me define Shemitah year for your audience.
Okay.
Every 7th year, the land of Israel had to rest. And it's because Israel did not allow that to happen that they went into the Babylonian captivity for 70 years. Okay, this is why, because they didn't allow the land to rest. Well, every 7th year also was to be an economic reset year where all the debts were to be forgiven. And so what happened in Nebuchadnezzar's time in 587 BC, the Jews hadn't kept the Shemitah year, or the 7th year of the 7-year cycle for the land to rest. for a long time, and when they see they're about to be attacked, they say, oh, we better follow God. And so they declare the Shemitah year, they set the debtors free, and then Egypt came along to help them attack Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar left. So Israel ended up trusting in Egypt rather than in God, and they put everyone back into captivity again, changing their mind. And so the Shemitah year became a year of judgment. And so the 7th year became a year of judgment. Well, in 1994 was a Shemitah year, and I don't know if you remember the Shoemaker-Levy comet. This is when 21 fragments pummeled Jupiter. You can Google it, find out about it. Well, guess what? That happened on the 9th of Av in 1994.
Again, the 9th of Av.
Yes, and so here, which speaks of judgment, in a Shemitah year, 21 fragments, which is 7 times 3. So I felt that meant the next 3 Shemitah years would be years of judgment. And so in 2001, the Dow fall, which is 7 years later, the Dow falls 7% on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the 7th month of the 7th year. And then what happens exactly 7 years later in 2008, and you only see this on the biblical calendar, it was Rosh Hashanah again. The first day of the 7th month of the 7th year, the Dow falls 7%, and it was a $700 billion loss on a failed $700 billion bailout. You know, and so it's like, well, now here comes the third strike. As you said, 2015 could be the third strike where the economy collapses. Could be.
Right. So now, we've got, from that time, he's talking about an events from 1994. This is the Shoemaker-Levy comet in 1994. So what I'm going to put up here, I'm going to show you some events that's actually taken place. So what he thought was taking place, there's no way to confirm at that time, but you can look back at what he talked about and what actually took place in those Shemitah years that followed. 1994, this is what happens. The Jupiter takes a huge blow from a comet. Now, if you watched last week, we know that the comet, all right, when it went into was Jupiter. Jupiter's the king planet. The king planet is the one that we see in Revelation 12, the type of the Virgo, the constellation, the 12 stars, and in the child being born, basically, and the moon was at her feet, and you can go back and you can look at that again. So it's interesting that Jupiter was being attacked, so to speak, by all these fragments that actually began on the 9th of Av. So if you're not a Jewish scholar, the 9th of Av, or is the 2 days that Jerusalem fell in both of the temples on the 9th of Av. It's also the time of the cow. Then Moses was up in the mount when he came down, and he had to destroy the people for going pagan. That was actually, you can track that down, being the 9th of Av. So the 9th of Av is always an ominous time for Israel. So that's what we're looking at here. So all this is taking place is this hundreds of times the combined energy of the nuclear weapons on Earth, the size of the attack on Jupiter, a fireball that outshined the planet itself. So I went back through the internet and I started looking at it, and this is actually some of they were watching, see the brightness of that star is hitting. There was, on the 9th of Av, 7 days this took place. 21 pieces or 21 fragments that took place for 7 days. And you can see in that middle picture, if you see the middle picture, you see the burning. All right, so right up in here, you see this is taking place all at the same time. And of course, the left is the brightest one, which was actually shining brighter than the planet itself. Here you have the scars of where these pieces actually took place. And one report is that if you took all the nuclear weapons in the world today and you combined them all, it wouldn't be as much energy as that one that struck at that time. All the nuclear weapons, just to give you an idea of its size, to what we're looking at. The collisions from 90 took place in 1992. It ended up being a multi-day extravaganza from July 6th to the 22nd, 1994. 21 separate fragments of the comet smashed into Jupiter's atmosphere, leaving the blotches behind. It's interesting now, all those blotches have almost been covered up. Through the dust and the winds and everything that's been settled, you can hardly even see them. Sunset July 16th began the 9th of Av on God's calendar. It has become known as the day of destruction for Israel and the fall of the 2 temples. So I wanted to bring that out historically. What's interesting about all these things, like their signs, there was no way to predict that. But you can look back into the heavens and say, it's there's a possibility this is in God's hands. So if he was showing us of ominous times that's coming, what would be the things that actually come? All right, so here's our time again. All right, now I got the dates up. You have 1994, 2001, 2008, and 2015. All right, so 1994, the Shoemaker-Levy begins to crash into Jupiter, the 9th of Av, for 7 days. On Rosh Hashanah, the Dow opens up the first day since 9/11, falls 7%. It was closed for 7 days. When it finally opens up, it falls 7%, and it just happens to be Rosh Hashanah on the day that it actually takes place. 7 years later, September 29th, again, Rosh Hashanah, at sunset, the Dow closes down 7 points again, 777 points. You can't get this much by accident. The number 7 is completion. So in the next video, which I'll show you next time, part video, we go through these things, we talk about these events, and I tell in the video, it says, just because we haven't seen what happened doesn't mean nothing has happened. So while he was preparing, everybody was preparing for the worst. We show that in the handwriting on the wall. We're going to be bringing that out in the future sermon too. The handwriting on the wall, warning everybody what's taking place. Even though the stock market did not fall 7%, this has got to be one of the most devastating years in modern history for America, 2015. And on this day, on the Day of Atonement, is the day that the Pope came to America. I believe God was showing us that he's basically washed his hands of this nation. It was the year that we voted in the homosexual marriage approval act in this nation. First Shemitah this century, second Shemitah this century, and the third Shemitah this century. And in each one of those occasions, nothing but warning and destruction that was taking place. We're going to cover more of this. As you can see, it's pretty in-depth. It's a lot of information. So how does all this fall into deception? Well, the church says that means nothing. Really. A lot of coincidences, a lot of accidents, a lot of warnings that's taken place. And if we don't look to what God says, as in Joel, before the day of the Lord, you'll see signs in heavens. If you ignore that, you ignore it to your peril. All right, let's bring this to a close now. Daytona Beach next week. Actually, when you get this program, it's going to be Friday. We will be in Daytona Beach. Clayton's with us, Clayton Evans, who's with our team now, and Jeff and Audrey and Jeff's wife, Georgianne, will all be down there. It's in Daytona Beach in on Madison Avenue. So I've got all the information here. We've been talking about it. Just freeze the picture, and you can get the phone number and the email address for specifics. I also have the events here, beginning Friday evening for fellowship, and then we're beginning early Saturday at 10 o'clock. We're actually going to be opening up some, I believe, 8 or 9 o'clock for coffee and refreshments for anybody who's in town. And then we're going to make an entire day of it. So hope if you're in the area, come on out. We're going to have the dedication for the building that was given to us through the remodeling, and we're going to have some awesome pictures we'll be bringing you, God willing, next week when we're back here with News, Nuggets, and Insights. On Sunday morning, we'll wrap it up with a ministerial conference for the ministers who are able to attend from the church, a ladies' fellowship, and lunch and to-go snacks, and everybody head back on the road on their way home. DVDs in the mail last week. If you didn't get yours, be sure to write for it. This is Hananiah the prophet and Jeremiah, my part 1 in the series, and also the Deception and Lying Wonders. Is this our first one of the, all right, so this is actually where it all began with Deception and Lying Wonders on News, Nuggets, and Insights on February 8th. Now, the good news, if you didn't catch every program, you can go to the website, go to godsunchangingword.org, GUCW.org, and then you go through, just drop down the box where you see News, Nuggets, and Insights, and all of the archives are there. So you can catch this portion of our program for the lying deception, every one of them since February 8th, till it's completed. So you won't miss anything. So if you're just new to the program, you're just catching it, you haven't missed a thing. You can go back and catch them all. In the mail last week, the newsletter. We're actually talking about Deception, Lying Wonders in the newsletter. And we're also offering in the card the very first part of the series that we're doing, Lying Wonders and Deception. So we got you covered everywhere. We got it in sermons, the news and nuggets, on the website, and in the newsletter. So pretty serious. Like Paul said, he spent 3 years warning the people day and night, he said, and he did it with tears that deception was going to come in. And so as we move closer and closer to the return of Jesus Christ, deception is going to continue to creep its way into the church. And so we think it's important enough to try to bring out as much as we can bring to help people be prepared for the return of Jesus Christ. Well, that's it for our program. Now, as always, we want to close our program with a little bit of an uplifting video. And this one, this is just one of our favorites. Now, as everybody is getting ready to move out of the winter, we get the tale of two parts of the country. Up north, you're going through a terrible winter still. But if you get further south, you're beginning to see the thaws of what's taking place and spring starting to bust out down here with south. Let's play our video, and I'll be right back to close our program. God and Dog.
I look up and I see God. I look down and see my dog. Simple spelling G-O-D, same word backwards D-O-G. They would stay with me all day. I'm the one who walks away, but both of them just wait for me and dance at my return with glee. Both love me no matter what, divine God and canine mutt. I take it hard each time I fail, but God forgives, dog wags his tail. God thought up and made the dog. Dog reflects a part of God. I've seen love from both sides now. It's everywhere. Amen. Bow wow. I look up and I see God. I look down and see my dog. And in my human frailty, I can't match their love for me.
I just love that video. And, you know, after doing a program like we had to cover today, you just got to get into something that puts you back close to God and just keep you there and keep you warm. And what better way than the animals that God placed on this earth? They know their place. They have their love and admiration for God. And we too should do that. Great little video. We're so glad that the lady who created that some years ago, by all means, allowed us to use that program, that video. And we thank her for that. All right, don't forget now, this weekend, it says next week. Technically, that's correct, by the way, because Sunday at 12 o'clock, Saturday night to Sunday morning, it's next week. Technically, it's correct. Saturday night at 2 a.m. to turn your clocks up. You lose an hour. They took a whole hour from you. Don't worry, they're going to give it back to you this coming fall. So with interest, you have plenty extra time. Well, that's it for News Nuggets and Insights. Thanks again for watching. From all of us here at God's Unchanging Word, we thank you for watching. Thanks for being a part of our program. Don't forget, if you're in Daytona this week, come on out for our dedication weekend. And God willing, we'll be back here again next week. Same time, same channel.